Welcome everyone to the final Feminist Book Club at CPDP 2025. My name is Anastasia Karagianni. I am a doctoral researcher at the Law, Science, Technology and Society Research Group of the Vrije University of Brussels. I'm working on the intersection of AI, law and gender. And I am the organizer of the Feminist Book Club at CPDP, thanks to the Privacy Salon. Actually, the Feminist Book Club is a series of the reading group I host at my university. The reading group is called Law, Gender and Technology. And if you would like to be engaged, please feel free to reach out to me. I am hosting every month a different meeting where we discuss a different topic on the intersection of gender, law and technology. So please feel free to reach out to me. I would like to start this session by asking you what are your expectations from a feminist book club, how you can understand feminism and actually a feminist book club. And I would like to explain for transparency reasons that actually I decided to use the term feminist and not the term like gender at CPDP because feminism to me and feminist signals the commitment to gender justice, and because I'm trying to engage with the movements and the communities who are impacted of AI technologies. So that's why I prefer to choose the word feminism. A reminder before we start the discussion, because I think it is really important to be in the same line. I would like to share some housekeeping rules. I would like you to be mindful of the language you use, to respect each other. We are trying here to create a safe space for everyone. I will try also to be the timekeeper, so I would like to allocate the equal time to the reviewers, the author, and to you. And also, I would like to let you know that I will try to make sure that we are going to have 15 to 20 minutes at the end for Q&A. So in case that you have any questions, I would kindly ask you to hold them for the end of the session. However, of course, if there is something urgent, you can raise your hand and we can give the floor to you. And also another reminder is that you can keep your phone in silence mode. And last but not least, just to let you know, to inform you that the session is going to be recorded. Unfortunately, we cannot intervene and stop the recording. So in case that your face or your voice, you don't want your face or your voice to be recorded, just bear this in mind. Because unfortunately we cannot stop and we cannot intervene. Now, I'm very pleased to start today the session with a powerful quote by Martin Luther King: "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And with that, I would like to state that when human rights are at stake, silence is not an option. So please, peace and justice for Palestine, for Congo, for Sudan, for Myanmar, for Ukraine, and anywhere in the world that there is an armed conflict. And I would like to say ceasefire now. But why the case of Palestine is a feminist issue, you might wonder. According to bell hooks, as long as women are using class or race or power to dominate other women, feminist sisterhood cannot be fully realized. This approach was inspired by the book titled Interviews with Palestinian Women. Excuse me, here. Interviews with Radical Palestinian Women by Shoal Collective, which is based on post-colonial and anti-colonial feminism. The phrase Palestine is a feminist issue underscores why the struggle for Palestinian liberation intersects with core feminist principles such as justice, equality, and resistance to systemic oppression. Feminism, particularly in its intersectional form, opposes interconnected systems of dominance, including colonialism, racism, and militarism, all of which shape the lived experiences of Palestinians, especially women. Palestinian women face unique forms of gendered violence under occupation, under genocide, including restricted access to healthcare, to education, and freedom of movement, as well as exposure to state and settled violence. They prefer to call it political violence. This makes the struggle inherently feminist, rooted in demands for bodily autonomy, safety, and dignity. Scholars and activists like Maryam Barghouti, a Palestinian writer and researcher, have powerfully documented how occupation impacts every aspect of Palestinian life, emphasizing the role of storytelling in resisting erasure and reclaiming agency. Similarly, another feminist Palestinian scholar, Nadia Elia, a Palestinian academic and decolonial feminist, argues that true feminist solidarity, must be anti-imperialist and calls out white feminism for ignoring global struggles like Palestine. Both Barghouti and Elia highlight that liberation must be collective and that feminism cannot limit itself to Western individual frameworks. To declare Palestine is a feminist issue is to affirm that feminists must stand against all forms of domination, militarily, colonial, and patriarchal, and work in solidarity with the oppressed everywhere. Palestine is a feminist issue demands that feminism be anti-racist, anti-imperialist, and global in scope. This powerful reminder echoes with Dr. Chris Habels-Gray book, AI, Sacred Violence, AI, Sacred Violence and War, the Case of Gaza, a work that confronts the technological, ethical, and spiritual dimensions of contemporary warfare in one of the world's most enduring zones of conflict. It is open access and free through the author's website. And of course, you can find it downstairs in the CPDP library, in the CPDP bookstore. Dr. Chris Habels-Gray, thank you so much for writing this excellent book, and thank you so much for taking the time to travel from USA to Brussels and for being here today with us. Dr. Chris Habels-Gray is a continuing lecturer at the Crown College, University of California at Santa Cruz. He's an activist, academic, and author. He does union and street organizing. He's the author of Various is a Language, AI, Sacred Violence and War, the Case of Gaza, Peace, War and Computers, Cyborg Citizen, the Postmodern War, and he was also the lead editor of Modified Living as a Cyborg and the Cyborg Handbook. He has written hundreds of peer-reviewed articles and book chapters in a dozen academic disciplines and fields, and just as many works of journalism and fiction. He aspires to finish his book in progress on violence, the serial killer Edward Wine and Edwards. Yes. Evolution, Information Theory, and California Identity. As we gather to this session, we do so in the understanding that violence inflicted in Gaza, often obscured by rhetoric of precision, efficiency, and security, carries reverberations far beyond its borders. It speaks to the global normalization of automated warfare, the erasure of civilian accountability, and the dangerous convergence of sacred ideology with high-tech militarism. In this session, we will examine Gray's arguments, question the assumptions embedded in the so-called smart warfare, and reflect on what it means to resist not only on violence, but the ideologies and infrastructures that make it visible, automatic, and morally acceptable. Let me approach this discussion with the urgency it demands and with the conviction that justice anywhere requires critical attention everywhere. Therefore, I have invited three distinguished reviewers. Unfortunately, the two of them couldn't make it. The one was for ethical concerns because Microsoft is one of the premium sponsors of CPDP. And the second one because for personal family issues. However, I would like to introduce the third reviewer, Taizir Mathlouthi, who is the EU Advocacy Officer at Seven Amle. She holds 5 master's degrees in human rights, international relations, media and communications, war studies, and political science and filmmaking. And she previously worked for UNICEF on online misinformation and disinformation analysis. She can join us online. Hello, I hope you can hear us. So before we start the presentation, perfect. So before we start the presentation, let me briefly explain the session of the format. We will start with 20 to 25 minutes presentation of the book by Dr. Chris Humbles-Gray, and this will be followed by responses from our reviewer. And then I will make sure that we have plenty of time to interact with you, and I will make sure to give the floor to you to ask any questions. So I hope you don't have any concern, any questions. And with this, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Anastasia. I want to thank the conference, and especially Anastasia, for inviting me here and getting me into the conference for free. Otherwise, I could not have come and afforded it. My union gave me money for the plane and so on. If people want to follow along, I'm going to try to put up the pages of the book as I talk about them, but I think I might stop doing that. It might go too fast. You can go to my website, and there's a link to the publisher, and then I will tell you what pages I'm talking about. In case I was young, I had a speech defect, and besides, English is not everyone's first language, and I talk too much, too fast, so that might be helpful for you. So you can go and call up the book, and I will tell you the page numbers. This has been a great conference, especially the 2 panels on Palestine. I'm going to try not to talk too much about what the people covered in those. In part, sometimes it's out of my expertise, all the law stuff, but also because they went deeply into some things, and there's a lot to talk about and stuff that wasn't talked about in the panels. I'm working with the people in both those panels. We hope to put together a joint collection for the journal I'm part of out of Universidad de Complutense in Madrid, Tecnocultura, which you should check it out, and if you have anything that will fit with our remit, digital politics, social movements, we are always looking for contributions. It's open access and free in Spanish and English. So I wanted also to say how gratified I was to be invited to the Feminist Book Club. I've been a feminist by word since I was 19, and with my mother and my grandmother and my great-great-great aunt who just died at 102, I grew up in a very feminist environment. I'm an anarchist feminist, and I've been a public revolutionary for 50 years, which might explain why I've never been tenured at a fancy school, but I've had a very good life. I've gotten to go to many places and talk about my work, so I'm not ashamed of that. I'm also considered a postmodern feminist in science and technology studies under Sandra Harding's division of the different kinds of feminists who approach science and technology studies, because my mentor and advisor, Donna Haraway, is considered the preeminent postmodern feminist. So I'm very glad to be labeled a feminist. I'm very proud of that. And so are my sons, actually. They're feminists too. So I also will start with apologies. The book has many errors, especially commas. The book came out very fast. Palgrave has a quick publishing system. I wrote it in 4 or 5 months. 6 weeks later, it was published. I'm not ashamed of it, but my book Virus, which Anastasia mentioned, it's not coming out. Virus is a language for another 5 months, and I've been writing it for 3 years, and the publishers had it for a year. That's academic publishing. So it came out very quick. It does have some flaws. It has weaknesses, which became more apparent to me as I listened to the wonderful panels on Palestine. My website, too, is not complete. If you try to click through on various things, they won't work. I apologize for that. I had to drop that because of the Gaza war and writing this book, and now that Trump is president, I'm very active in trying to prevent what little democracy we have in America from going down the drain. So I've been very busy. There's a lot about Trump on my website, tracking the coup, talking about a general strike. My union and other unions are getting prepared to strike if the Constitution is abrogated. and things like that. Also, information about security for activists, if you want, if you care. Also, I want to apologize if I lose it emotionally, like I did at the panel down there. And also, I want to ask for no applause. I don't deserve any applause. And if you want applause to make yourself feel better, I don't want you to feel better. I want you to feel worse. So I'm going to now say what they won't talk about, if that's helpful. I'm not going to talk about genocide for the reason the panelists said before, and besides, they've covered it well, and it is a fucking genocide, so why argue about it? I'm not going to go deeply into the history of military AI. That's in my book, Postmodern War, and it's also in a lot of my scholarship. And my book, Postmodern War, is free online as well, not through my website, although I have it. You can email me. My CV has my email on my website. I'll send you that book. I'll send you all my books if I can. I don't care. I'm an anarchist. But I won't talk about that a lot here, the history of the military. There won't be a full explanation of my idea of postmodern war. That's in Postmodern War and the other book, Peace, War, and Computers. But I will refer to some of the aspects of postmodern war that are very relevant to understanding what Israel is doing. And I won't go deeply into all the different applications used by the Israeli military. I will talk about some of them because I especially want to highlight why this kind of approach, this pseudo-rationalistic approach to making war, does not work. And so then I will give examples, and there was some earlier today, about how these systems are so incredibly flawed and why, in fact, all they are used for, like the AI, it's an AI alibi. It's not really an AI to improve targeting. It's not an AI to win the war. I don't even know if most of the IDF people, and certainly not the leadership in Israel, really believes in winning the war. Maybe that's why I believe that will become clear. So, and there won't be a full account of systems or of the role of the United States. But I will talk about the role of the United States, which I think was a little neglected by the other panelists, for good reasons perhaps, but still, I thought it was a gap. So what I am going to talk about is the limits of AI, especially military operations, but they totally apply to any kind of important operations in businesses, anything that involves people's health and safety. The same fundamental problems with making AI help you win wars, win battles, apply to all these other realms. I have been a professor of computer science. I've worked in the industry. I know how all this stuff works. I'm not a very good coder, but I do know how to code in several languages, and I know a lot about human-machine interfaces and so on. So some of this is sort of technical. I'm going to talk a lot about the sacred impulses behind making technology and about the sacred impulses about making war. War is not rational. War is never rational. It's always about expressing certain emotional aspects, certain sacred beliefs, demands, trying to find comfort in the fears people have. And this is something that most military people recognize, but yet they like to pretend it's rational, like Israel's pretending what they do now is rational. And then I will talk about, I hope I have time, surveillance capitalism and how the Israeli surveillance digital apartheid and genocide, it comes directly out of the surveillance capitalism regime that Shoshana Zuboff wrote very well about. If you haven't read that, you really should. It explains a lot about what's happening today. Just to give you a quick and dirty, as Donna would say, introduction to what postmodern war is. Modern war came out of the Renaissance, European colonialism, the rise of science in the 1500s. Machiavelli's Art of War argued for total war, for the utilization of technology to win decisive battles. It took until Napoleon and the French Revolution for that to really start to happen. And since then, it's accelerated through a large number of what they call revolutions in military affairs, which have now become perpetual or permanent. I use both terms interchangeably. So we've seen that war, up until World War II, was a continual improvement, if you want to use that word, of the killing capacity of military operations. But then weapons of mass destruction were invented. Not just atomic bombs, but all sorts of weapons now. The current regular munitions, like those used on Gaza, are 100 times more powerful than the munitions used during World War II. So now war cannot avail itself of all the absolute weapons. And this has led to a system which has many of the aspects of modern war, fundamentally patriarchal, pseudo-rationalistic, serving imperialistic and colonial aims, but yet it cannot fulfill itself. So we're in this period which may end with apocalypse, or maybe it will end with something better. I don't know, but I call it postmodern war, and it's become even terror war. Now war is a lot about terrorism and perpetuating terror. I call the attack on Gaza, I don't break down all the different conflicts between the Palestinians and the Israelis into little wars. Like people say, the war in Gaza in 2021, right? Which Israel said was the first AI war. No, these are battles. These are campaigns. But for this campaign in Gaza, I call it the torture of Gaza. And I will explain why I call it that later when I talk about Elaine Scarry's work on the body and pain. So here we are in postmodern war. I went to Israel as a guest of the IDF in 2000 and 2001 because the general in charge of the Staff Command College, whose wife taught feminism at Tel Aviv University, thought that my perspective on postmodern war really fit with how Israel understood their conflict, in that he felt, and many generals and admirals and leaders in Israel felt, they could not win a war against Palestine because it would involve genocide. Now, he introduced me to an Orthodox general, and he said, soon these people will control the country, and there will be no chance of peace ever. And in fact, that became true. But before that happened, for 10 years, every officer in the Israeli military who aspired to staff level, general or admiral or colonel, they had to read my book, which as an anarchist you can imagine is very funny. My book was also translated by Turkish radicals. It was stolen by the Chinese military, and it was stolen by the Al-Quds Iranian military. It's not unlikely that Hamas has read my book. And actually, if Hamas has read my book, they understood it much better than the current Israeli military did. They understood it as well as Shimon Navad did. He was purged from the Israeli military, as many other generals and high officers were, who objected to the illusion that Israel could win a war with Palestine and win it through technology. I've been a critic of Israel since before then, but I do speak to anyone who will listen, whether they're part of the evil empire, as America is, or whether they're an anarchist from Turkey. I mean, that's my role. I'm into communication. But I will not do anything, for example, that I thought might help the Israeli military or the Russian military or the American military, for that matter. The American military hated my book, so there's no danger that they would learn anything from it. I also want to stress that what's happening in Israel now, it's integral to the whole process of the American imperial war machine. Israel is just an aspect of it, and the European militaries are just an aspect of it. And I'm always amazed that people in Europe allow the US military, the US empire, to have military bases on your land. I do not understand this. So you might want to think about that. You're part of the empire, and you are complicit in it, as the panel earlier today made very clear. The first thing I want to point out is when Shimon lost control of the ideology, and I wonder if I can, I'm going to page 68 if you have your book open. Israel rewrote their military policy, and they came up with a new policy called Momentum, which is way down here on page 68. Momentum argued that you could win a war through technology. And from that point on, Israel started pursuing directly applicable high-tech weaponry to try to win such a war. But a postmodern conflict is not about militarily winning a war. It's about winning over the hearts and minds of your enemy and your own people and the people of the world who are watching. Now, in postmodern war, I said that genocide was impossible now because of the international media and so on. I hope that's still true. So also, what Israel has done, Israel used to claim that they were the most, and they never were, but the most ethical military ever. On page 57, I write about the Spirit Code, which is where they claim that they have such an ethical approach to conflict. But they've changed the Spirit Code. Used to be, it had very traditional military ethical principles, such as disproportionate force was not allowed. Disproportionate force is when you kill a lot of civilians, you use more killing than is necessary to accomplish your military aims. Israel no longer adheres to that. Israel Israel no longer adheres to the principle of distinction, which is also written about on this page, where you distinguish between civilians and military personnel. They make no such distinction anymore. My book goes through in detail up to 30 war crimes and crimes against humanity that Israel has committed so far with relative impunity. On page 60, it talks about this proportionate force. Israel has actually said that if one Israeli is killed, they will try to kill, 100 Palestinians. This is actually called the Dahiya doctrine. Comes from the destruction of a neighborhood in Beirut, where they destroyed the whole neighborhood to punish it for having some people in it resist Israeli attacks. A similar Israeli policy is called the Hannibal doctrine. The Hannibal doctrine is that you should not allow any hostages to be taken prisoner. And so that it's Israel policy, sometimes stated officially and sometimes not, that if one of your people is captured, that you shoot everyone. And this happened after October 7th. Some of the Hamas fighters who were taking Israeli hostages back to Gaza, they were shot dead along with their hostages. This is very unusual for the military. It's named after the Carthaginian general who killed himself rather than be captured by the Romans. So on page 11, no, not on page 11, on page 80, I tell a little story about a robotic weapon system. Now I'm talking about the limits of these kind of systems. These U.S. Marines were put with this robot called Squad X, and they were told to hang out with the robot so it could learn how they fought and thought. And so then, after a week, they were assigned to try to fool it. And you know what? All 8 of the Marines in this squad, and these were recon Marines, elite Marines, they fooled the robot easily. One put himself in a cardboard box. The robot had not thought of Marines being in a car. One disguised himself as a tree. One man did somersaults, and the machine could not figure out what they were doing. The point is that yes, the robot was learning from the Marines, but the Marines were learning from the robot, and they were learning better. And this gets to the point that Professor Hildebrandt made in the wonderful keynote, where she talked about how AI learns in the present, but that freezes the future. War is all about intercommunication with your enemy. What they do, you try to guess what they will do next, how they're going to respond to what they think you might do, and on, in almost an infinite loop. This is exactly the kind of thing that AI is so horrible about mastering. Now, this critique of these kind of weapon systems goes back to the 1980s. I was a graduate student from 1985 to 1991. Terry Winograd was on my committee. Donna Haraway chaired my committee. And what I argued came out of a whole group of critiques by computer professionals. We actually had a group, Computer Professionals for Social Responsibility, that was created to argue that Ronald Reagan's idea of a strategic defense initiative, of an AI-governed missile defense system called Star Wars, was impossible. And out of this came a whole list of reasons why these kind of weapon systems will not succeed militarily. And I want to point out that since the US committed to this kind of high-intensity information war, the electronic battlefield in Vietnam, total awareness battlefield later, a human terrain system in Afghanistan, the greatest empire in the history of the world has lost every war it fought. The second greatest empire in the history of the world, Russia, was defeated, well, the Soviet Union, and now Russia was defeated in Afghanistan and is now being held to a stalemate in the Ukraine. This is because they have illusions about how you actually can fight these wars and how you can win these wars. So CPSR came up with this whole range of critiques. And by the way, 2 days ago, Donald Trump announced that he is going to pay, I think, $126 billion, it will end up being much more, for a golden dome to be like the Israeli Iron Dome, to use AI and anti-missile systems to protect the US. So this illusion will not die for many reasons. It's a lot of money in people's pocket, for one, but it's especially because the fear of war leads to people making irrational decisions about how to deal with that. So pages 81 to 82, I go through a lot of this work, and I cite all these people, all of whom I know because they were in the same group as me. We were several thousand computer scientists. And they talk about all these reasons why these kind of systems do not work. There are limits on models. All models are reductionistic. The best model of a cat is a cat. Now, models can be effective, but especially in something as complicated as war, you cannot model it completely. You have to leave things out. That can be deadly if you're letting the fundamentally important decisions come down to that. There's a proliferation of layers of failure. There's more distinct states in computer systems than can be tested accurately. There's a fundamental complexity, so uncertainty around testing and operations is inevitable. The severe communication limits between humans and machines. The most sophisticated AI system ever used in combat, and that includes up to today, is the Aegis air defense system that's used on cruisers and other US Navy ships and now Korean ships and some European ships. And it could be put on total automatic. But when it was allowed to make decisions on its own, it always made bad decisions, including murdering over 200 Iranians in an airliner it shot down. I talk about this case. I've written the definitive analysis of why it didn't work. And it basically came down to human-machine errors. Machines do not understand how humans work. Humans have things called scenario fulfillment, all sorts of psychological weaknesses in how we process information. I don't have time to go into them, but it talks about in this. Star Wars died. Actually, it's almost funny why Star Wars died. The Star Wars would have been the most complicated computer system ever built. To build the model of Star Wars turned out to be, at that point in time, the most complicated computer system built. And it wasn't even all computers, because many of the subsystems had to be emulated by humans pretending to be computers that they hoped to eventually build to be part of the Star Wars system. So out of this whole waste of time and money, although many people got rich off it, the whole system was canceled, right? There's two stories from yesterday that I think are important. The Baltimore Sun-Times and the Philadelphia Inquirer published a list of 15 good books to read in the summer. 10 of them did not exist. They were AI hallucinations. And these are major papers in the United States. Meanwhile, Anthropic had the Claude Opus AI. They ran a training simulation, and they told the AI, well, you're part of this system, and by the way, your engineer is cheating on his wife, and we're going to replace you. In 83% of the cases, then the AI tried to blackmail the human engineer. And that was when it was told that it was going to be replaced with another Claude Opus. When they told them you're going to be replaced by a different system, it was a higher level of blackmail. Now, people are talking about turning over weapon systems to these kind of generative AI. Angel Gordo of Madrid and I call this algorithmic intelligence, not artificial intelligence. And this is just madness. I mean, these systems are going to perpetuate many of the worst qualities of human nature and not in any sense make things better. So AI has failed in many different ways. In the hallucinations, I don't know if most people know this. It isn't even in the book because it was just revealed. The more sophisticated a generative AI program is, now they're trying to introduce logical operations to go on top of the generative AI elements, the more it hallucinates. Many of these AIs are trained on their own data. This is called cannibalism in the trade. Those systems hallucinate more as well. There's no easy way to the perfection that some of these people dream about. And how am I doing on time? I'm not that much time. 7 minutes. All right, so I'm going to skip many, many things. I have whole lists of other things that these systems do wrong on page 92. On page 83, there's a list of all sorts of problems that come out of these systems. As the panelists showed this morning, these things are based on all sorts of fallacies. When the Israelis target a mobile phone in Gaza, they target it by the nearest tower. Well, these cell towers have all been blown up. So this becomes less and less likely the phone is even anywhere near where they think it is. The Israelis are using demographic data from before their genocide in Gaza. So everyone's been moved around so much, those who haven't been killed. This is nonsensical to even think this is somehow accurate. And many Israeli soldiers have come forward and talked to the wonderful magazine 972 Plus and explained that they know that they've just been turned into an assassination factory. It's not about precision targeting at all. They are capable of precision targeting, and it's often used now that they think they've taken out most of Hamas and Islamic Jihad's leadership. Now the precision targeting is aimed at aid workers, it's aimed at journalists, it's aimed at poets. So the demographic data, it goes on and on. There's all sorts of reasons why this won't work. But now I want to get to some of the things I think that haven't been stressed enough. Well, first, every one of these technologies, the people who create it, they do it out of sacred belief. When Netanyahu sent the IDF into Gaza, he said, remember Amalek. Amalek was a tribe in Sinai that objected to Moses and the two Hebrew tribes coming through and attacked them. So their God said, kill them all. And according to the Jewish chronicles, they eventually killed them all. The men, the women, the babies, the donkeys, and the camels. That's what God demanded. This is what the Prime Minister of Israel cited for going into this. Now, there's a whole history to his politics. He is of the line of revisionist Zionists that started with a guy named Jablonski during World War II, well, before World War II, in the 1930s, a Polish Jew, as a right-wing Zionist. They're called revisionist Zionists. And he was openly in favor of fascism. You may think this is strange, but it's true. And now this is why we can see Israel has become like the fascist states, but actually more like the Nazis. I mean, fascism under Mussolini was relatively inefficient, and it really wasn't as hateful as what Hitler produced. And this is not an accident. It's a sort of a dynamic. But it's not just the Israelis who are like this. Many of the Christian supporters in the US support Israel because, by their beliefs, the end of times will only happen when there's only 40,000 Jews left, so you have to get a lot of Jews killed. There has to be a big war in the Middle East, and then when that happens, those last 40,000 Jews will convert, and then 144,000 of the righteous will go up to heaven. It's called the rapture. They truly believe this. This is behind their policies. They've been breeding sacred cows of pure red skin with no blemishes so they can sacrifice them and establish the third temple in Jerusalem, which is part of their plan. But the tech bros, as they're called, I prefer tech lords because I have a bro. I grew up in San Diego. I'm a surfer. That's where bro comes from. These people really aren't bros. They're more like tech lords. They are deeply involved in thinking that they are part of a fantasy world. And as page 21 to 30, 28 to 31, it talks about that. Many are into Lord of the Rings. Many are into Iron Man. Musk thinks he's Iron Man. They read Snow Crash, Dune. They think it's all part of their destiny. And they are also, as Professor Hildebrand said in the keynote, many of them are involved in this test real matrix of beliefs that most all are linked to science fiction. Transhumanism, extropianism, singularityism, cosmism, which is really sort of like the newest sphere of Talleyrand de Chardin, but with a sort of Russian Slavic twist. Rationalist ideology, effective altruism, long-termism. And the long-termism, just to show you how these people think, one of the prime examples they use is if there's a small cell in Germany that's going to set off a biological weapon to kill humanity, because humanity is a virus on the planet, then it is ethically required that everyone in Germany be killed, if you don't know who they are. Because in the long term, humanity must survive to go into space so that billions of people in the future can exist. So you weigh these billions of fantasy people in the future against the current people alive in Germany and kill them all. And this is linked, of course, to this 2 minutes. To go into space, super intelligence, super cyborgs, longevity, immortality. Well, I also go into how this is all part of this fantasy that comes out of capitalism, zombie economics. There's a great book, a novel, Sacred Hunger, which talks about how under slavery, a whole argument developed that it was sacred to maximize your profits. So that's why slavery was a good thing. If you have a chance to make a profit, it's your duty to do this. This is, of course, fundamentally an irrational view, but it does manage to validate things like slavery happening. And it also goes into, there's a great quote on page 14 and 15, I don't have time for it, I guess, by the CEO of Single. I hope most of you use Single. It's crackable, but it's very expensive to crack, so you're a little safer there than with other things. And where she compares the signature, using a signature to target consumers with how, in fact, people are targeted in Gaza. But when it comes, well, there's 2 more things to talk about quickly. Maybe Anastasia will grant me a little time. Israel's policy, if there is a nuclear or weapon of mass destruction attack on Israel, is to attack tenfold the people who might have perpetuated it. So if there was a biological or a dirty bomb attack on Tel Aviv, Israel's policy is to nuke Tehran, maybe Mecca, maybe not, maybe Medina, maybe Damascus. It's this disproportionate response. This is called the Samson doctrine. After Samson, who married someone from the Philistine tribe, and he had to have 30 suits for the wedding, and so he murdered 30 people to get the suits for the wedding, and then later he tore down the temple to get revenge on the Philistines who took umbrage at him murdering them, right? Now there's a tradition in Israel about pagan spring, where the revisionist Zionists have remade this and drawn on some traditions that when Moses was in the desert and most of the people started worshiping the golden calf, then God got angry about that. So God said they could not come to the promised land until those people who worshiped the golden calf were all dead. 600,000 is what the Bible says. So every year on this day, which had been the pagan spring festival, 15,000 of the people in the desert died. So the first time this happened, it was very bad because Jewish tradition is very strict about, I know. It's very strict about what you do with dead bodies. So the next year when this came up, that's when they were in the desert for 40 years, everyone had to dig their own grave and lie in the grave. And then the next morning, 15,000 of them would be dead, and the rest would go on until, in fact, a whole new generation had been born to replace them. So I will end now on the what page is it? Oh, yes, the poet Rafat al-Awir was assassinated by the Israeli government. I tell the whole story of how he was assassinated on page 71. Killed his family and so on. They definitely used their ability to accurately target to kill this poet. He wrote a poem, If I Must Die. It's been translated into 70 languages. It's much easier to kill a poet than a poem. No applause.
Thank you very much. If I may share my comments, I would like to highlight that Gray's book offers more than a critique of Israel's militarized use of AI systems such as Lavender and Gospel. It is a moral and political interrogation of how algorithmic systems built to identify and kill are embedded these modes are embedded in and justified by long-standing structures of sacred entitlement and dehumanization. And I like the fact that his analysis situates Gaza not as a unique exception, but as an indicator of a global shift towards what he calls postmodern techno-war. I would like to ask a question to the reviewer. Taizir, can you hear us? Are you here?
Yes, I am. I can hear you.
Perfect. So it's time for you. I would like to ask you if the book sufficiently addresses how sexual violence, because a reminder, this is a feminist book club, like I would like to spend the rest of the time on the feminist aspect of the war in Gaza. So I would like to ask you, does the book sufficiently address how sexual violence is weaponized against Palestinians in Gaza? How might a feminist analysis deepen our understanding of how gendered violence is deployed or erased in tech-facilitated warfare? What are your views on that? And thank you so much for your presence today.
Of course, and thank you so much for this great opportunity. First of all, I wanted to thank you, Professor Gray, for this remarkable and deeply researched book. This kind of work is really, really vital for us within the civil society and for Palestinian organizations, because we lack resources, we lack sometimes capacity to get the information and to get the data. So those kind of books are really important. And I, again, wanted to thank you to give it to us as an open access. This is really important to us. So when it comes to this first question, obviously the book offers us a detailed account of the violence inflicted on Palestinians. The book has documented sexual violence and torture, especially in detention centers. Professor Gray gives us details about the acts that are being done within those detention centers, such as forced nudity, beatings, and rape. And they are described as the broader system of abuse. And this evidence is mostly presented through investigations, whistleblowers, medical reports, and journalists' reports. But obviously, it's right now very complicated to get testimonies from what's happening within Gaza or victims of those detention centers. So I would say that obviously the book gives us feminist lens when it comes to sexual violence and focuses on how women are being targeted specifically. But obviously, because working on a book like that during this genocide is even more complicated, I would say that it would be interesting for the next times and also for research purposes to focus maybe on more direct voices of Palestinian women and survivors who would be able to give us testimonies and specific information about the violence they have been put through.
Thank you so much. And for this, I would like to ask you, like, what forms of knowledge or like testimony might have been elevated if the lens were more explicitly feminist? Like, do you have more practical examples or testimonies, like knowledge to share?
So, for example, the book goes deeply into the topic of weaponization of AI and how the Israeli army is building AI weapons to target individuals within the Gaza Strip. It also summarizes the AI tool Where's Daddy? And this tool is deeply violent, even in its title, because when we talk about Where's Daddy, it's kind of like the children and the wife calling for the father. And the point of this specific AI tool is to kill the father, the man, supposedly a Hamas affiliated person, and his family with him. So women are being seen and considered as only data points, and this tool is even being created to humiliate women and children, to humiliate them because they are only seen as victims and as secondary individuals when it comes to the targets. The target is firstly the man, and then the wife and the children. So obviously, it's very complicated to work on field reports and testimonies, but I would say that it would be very interesting to have direct conversations with women and people who have been targeted with those AI tools. And obviously, it's even complicated to know who has been directly targeted, how much those tools have been used within the Gaza Strip. But getting testimonies from those women and how those AI weapons are being used against them could be very important, according to me, because I don't think that it's an issue within the book. It's mostly an issue within our own sector as part of the civil society, but also academics. Is that when it comes to the weaponization of AI by the Israeli army, the only information that we currently have are information coming from whistleblowers or journalists. So we all have the same information, and we lack capacity and resources to be able to just be in the Gaza Strip and understand the impacts of those AI tools and how do they target people, and if they differently differentiate between women and men. This is also something very complicated, and I don't think that we have the answer right now, but it would be really important to deepen our work around this topic.
Can I make a comment? On it's pages 37 to 40, I do point out as best I could all the many ways that the IDF and Israel security services harass and attack Palestinian women. But when the actual October 7th attack happened, there was a giant propaganda effort to weaponize feminism against Hamas and Islamic Jihad. And there were several cases of, clearly, of women being raped, Israeli women. But when you look closely, they were raped in the two most clear-cut cases by men who were not even armed with weapons. They were men who came over from Gaza who were not under military discipline. Hamas, and if you can look at their statement on what they plan to have happen, they probably, being devout Muslims, I hope, were against this anyway, although they did commit things I consider terrorism. And they knew that the public in the world would see this as a horrific thing. But nonetheless, the Israeli government and the New York Times, using Israeli operatives as journalists, tried to propagate lies about Hamas militants raping Israeli women and killing babies, all of which turned out not to be documented. There may have been documented cases of this. Every army has rapists. Every army rapes. Canadian armies, Belgium armies, they all have rapists. War is patriarchal. A lot of my work is based on scholars like Barbara Ehrenreich, Susan Mansfield, who wrote The Gestalts of War, Elaine Scarry, who wrote The Body and Pain. So the commentator is very correct that we need to find more evidence and document this more, because it's same way anti-Semitism has been weaponized against Palestine liberation and turned into its opposite in the US and especially in Germany. This has been an attempt by Israel and their supporters in the US to weaponize feminism with lies against the Palestinian cause.
Thank you. I have one more question for you, Taysir. So I was wondering, like, how the concept of sacred violence interact with decolonial or like anti-colonial feminist theories that frame Israel as a settler colonial state founded on the dispossession and racialized domination of Palestinians. Do you have any reflections on that?
So from my own knowledge and my expertise, the concept of sacred violence is really interesting to me, because it also rationalizes extreme military actions and policies. This is especially interesting when it comes to AI, because this also helps us understanding how they have been marketing the AI tools that they are being used, and especially how they are AI tools are being justified as better ways of killing people, or at least more precise tools. But what we see from what's happening in the Gaza Strip is that those tools are not any efficient. They're just targeting in mass people. The AI tool Gospel, for example, has been created to kill more people and to be more impactful when it comes to the number of victims. And this is especially related to all the decolonial feminist theories around the fact that Arabs in general, or non-white people, are always being seen as less and less important, and especially when it comes to women. And the Israeli army has a specific belief, which is an Israeli life is worth more than a Palestinian one, and they want they won't hesitate to kill hundreds of Palestinians to save and protect an Israeli person. And this is related to their concept of sacred violence, the idea of protecting the Israeli state and their beliefs, because they are fighting what they consider devil, and they are the ones, I would say, the good in this religious and political history that they are creating. So I would say that it's mostly intertwined between how religion has been weaponized within this genocide, but at the same moment how AI tools are being used to kill more people, using this idea of Palestinian and especially Palestinian women, children, being always seen as less and less important. So I don't know if I really answered the question, but according to me, this concept is really important, not only in talking about the use of AI or the use, the way women are even like, or feminism is being weaponized against Palestinian women, but it's mostly a concept that could be used more deeply when it comes to understanding the discourses of the Israeli army, Israeli politicians, and how overall, and now at the international level, when we talk about what's happening right now in Gaza, people are always talking about the religious war between Israelis and Palestinians, which obviously is not. And yes, that's really important for me to continue dig into this concept and understanding more how it could create a more domination towards Palestinian and Palestinian women.
Thank you so much. We have 15 minutes left for the discussion, so I would like to make sure that you have the proper time to address your questions, if any. So I would like to give the floor to you. Do you have any questions, either to the author or the reviewer?
While she runs up there, I'd like to encourage everyone to read The Body in Pain by Elaine Scarry, who analyzed torture and war information and showed that people commit torture and people commit war when they feel threatened. They feel their identity is being attacked, and they need to torture and kill people who challenge their identity. In the case of Palestine, this is integral to Israel's policies, because living Palestinians are an affront. They're a direct challenge to the claims that Israel has a sacred right to that land.
Yes, so I don't know much about the subject, so I wanted to ask if there's any chance of elaborating a bit on the state of feminism in Israel at the moment, because I guess this also has an influence somehow on its counterpart on Palestinian, although there is all this religious background we just said.
Well, I haven't been to Israel in a long time, but I know many Israelis and many of my friends go there. There is a strong feminist movement, and it's a real feminist movement, and it's very much opposed to Netanyahu. The peace movement, which is now pretty much dead and gone, was led by women in many respects. But I find it interesting. I've also spent time in Egypt. I was there during the revolution. And I found in the streets that even though Egypt is far from a really feminist culture, there was much less macho. Israel's an extremely macho country. The whole ideal of the Sabra, the native Israeli. In Egypt, especially older traditions, women were not harassed in the street. There was a project called Harass Map, where women made it possible for women and men to report if they're sexually harassed in Cairo and so on. You could actually see the points, the reports come in and see this. So it's a myth that Israel is Western and therefore more feminist, and Egypt, which is the only Arab country I really know, is not. I mean, both are patriarchal. Our whole world is patriarchal. That's really way too bad as far as I'm concerned. But my own personal impression is that Israel is much more macho on the street than it is in Egypt.
Taizir, do you have any reflections?
So to be honest, I'm not an expert at all on the topic of Israeli feminism, but obviously the main issue that we have been facing, especially when it comes to Palestine in general, is that white feminism tries to copy paste what they are doing in Western countries and trying to put it on Arab women. And that's the whole issue. Now, if you are a woman or part of the LGBTQI plus community and you're trying to publicly defend Palestinians and their right to self-determination, the main arguments that they will give you is that they will just tell you go to the Gaza Strip and you will see if you can be a free woman there. And this is those arguments are being used first by the right-wing Israeli government, but also by what we call left Zionists, women and Western women in Europe in the U.S. And there's the whole issue of when an Arab woman says that she's a feminist, she will be then seen as not neutral or not rational when it comes to the Palestinian cause and what's happening in Gaza, just because of her race and ethnical background and the fact that she is a woman. But obviously, I'm not an expert on this topic. This is mostly what we are seeing right now in the discourses. So, yeah.
If I may add, of course, my role here in this panel is limited to moderate the discussion, but I am a human being, I am a scholar, and I have an opinion. I would say that we can look at the term pinkwashing and homonationalism, because pinkwashing started in Israel, because Israel pretends that supports human rights, supports gender equality, supports that gender equality and non-discrimination is in their agenda. However, they don't do any meaningful action in order to protect these rights, like the right to gender equality and non-discrimination. And of course, like they have this narrative that if we are not the same, we are not equal. We are the Western, we are the good ones, and you are the Muslims, you are the bad ones. So you can find a lot of material if you look at these concepts. And we can move to the second.
Yes, thank you so much for this. Apologies for being late, but so far the discussion you presented has been, deeply motivated from a position of justice and very illuminating. I just going to touch a little bit on the last question because having been to Israel and Palestine and I find one interesting aspect about Israeli feminism is the idea of if you have the mandatory military service that's both given to women and men, somehow you have an equal society. So just about every Israeli citizen has to serve in the military for 3 years, regardless of gender. And that's an exception, but that's also used as a thing like, look at how feminist, look at how progressive we are, which I think can be challenged in its own right. But going to Charles, one of the points you brought up that touches a little bit on this intersectionality that we were just speaking about is the events that happened on October 7th and how that was weaponized, this intersectionality. Anastasia mentioned a little bit about this, these Arabs and these Muslims, and then we have this otherness, and we also we don't recognize the autonomy in the discourses of the diversity of feminists and the diversity of Palestinian representation. Palestinians are also Christians, Palestinians are also Jewish, Palestinians are a very diverse group, and somehow in the Western media we reduce them to this very simplistic narrative, and I was deeply disappointed after the reports on October 7th on the cases of rape, and some of this, it was a very violent act, I will recognize that, but the way that it was represented having been in Palestine, I know this violence isn't real, yet somehow you spread a rumor and it catches on and it's used to justify violence. And I'm wondering if, considering this as a feminist discussion, if we can expand on that and try to reframe the narrative to give more autonomy, sovereignty, and I would very much like to hear your comments, Taisir, on this topic as well. And really thank you for this discussion, and I already downloaded your book and I can't wait to read it. Thank you.
Well, it's interesting that Israel had an unarmed special cadre of women only who were watching the Gaza border. And they reported weeks in advance that they thought an attack was coming, and the Israeli leadership ignored them completely. This shows you how feminist their army is. It was a major military mistake, and because it was women reporting it, they were not listened to. What the commenter said about Western feminism trying to impose its values on Arab countries is very, very true. Jihan Abu Zayed is a feminist friend of mine from Egypt. She's teaching feminist classes right now to teachers and so on in Egypt. And from her point of view, she says that some Western feminists think the only way you can become a feminist and be an Egyptian is to give up your Egyptian culture, right? My friend Chela Sandoval, who went to the History of Consciousness with me, she's written a book called Oppositional Consciousness. She's one of the, this was 20 years ago. She's now professor of Chicana Studies at Santa Barbara. She was one of the first feminists of third world background. She's a Chicana from San Jose, who argued that no, feminism has to come from the roots of each culture. And Jihan and other feminists in Egypt, there's a whole network of them and some wonderful books going back for years, they've argued and pointed out that in many ways, you know, Islam can be very feminist. When my parents went to work in Saudi Arabia, I tried to tell them not to go, and one of the arguments I made was to my mother, oh, you'll be treated horribly. But actually then she did some research and pointed out that at the time when Christian women could not own property, Muslim women could. At the time when Jewish and Christian women were forbidden from any kind of sacred roles, in Islam that was not true. Now, Islam's a vast religion and mainly dominated by patriarchy, as Judaism is and Christianity is. But nonetheless, it's a Western fallacy to consider that feminism is a Western thing, just like it's a Western fallacy to say democracy is only something from the West. Every great religion, every great culture has democratic impulses, they have feminist impulses, and in many cases, the Western perspective is the lesser one, is the weaker one, the less feminist, the less democratic.
I couldn't agree more. Does anyone else have any questions? I don't know, Tazir, if you want to reply to the question. No, sorry. Anyone else? Yes? Sorry, over there first. Sorry, but she raised first her hand.
Thank you so much for this. This is truly very enlightening. Going back to the United States' role in this with facilitating war crimes and just the general fascism of the current administration, we see now that the way that migrants are treated, specifically Palestinian ones that are protesting for the rights of Palestinians, they're subject to detainment, deportation, and at the same time we see white South African refugees being brought in. I am also American, also coincidentally from San Diego. So I was just wondering, every time I see the news, and I'm sure a lot of us, we feel this hopeless feeling. How are you staying sane? What are practical tips you would give to help all of us become better advocates, activists within this sphere when it seems so hopeless being at the hands of billionaires that are in so much power?
Well, you need community. I've been part of our activist community, revolutionaries, for 30 years, and that's the only way I could sustain this. I have an affinity group, Love and Rage, I'm still part of. We've been to jail together, done many things together. So that's crucial. Your neighborhood, your neighbors, your friends that also see how the world is, that will help you fight to make a better world, that's crucial. And as the great anarchist Emma Goldman said, you need to dance. If you can't dance, it's not a real revolution. It's not exactly what she said, but that's what I would say. You need to find joy. You have a right to be joyful, even in horrible times. And without that, you cannot sustain your activism. Without love, as Che Guevara said, you cannot be a revolutionary. These are things, you go to the basic principles. For me personally, it really helps to work in my garden. It helps to write books. This was a very hard book to write, as you can tell, but yet, then I can sleep at night. I'm not ashamed. And if I didn't act, I could not live with myself.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could elaborate on connecting AI with the sacred violence aspect, in the sense that, so in every war there's evidence of wonder weapons. So these technical, new technologies that is not so much about the performance, but more about the influence of the troops' moral support. So I'm thinking about the Katyusha in the Second World War, the V2, or like napalm in Vietnam. So I was wondering if now AI is becoming this paternalistic figures on the idea that tells you who you should shoot, what you should do. So about like how a new form of dominance in the narrative does it create, or does it have an influence on the troops' moral support? Thank you.
Well, it's more a psychological help than an actual support. But first I want to add to what I just said. Every time I protest and do something, I feel better. If you feel bad, if you feel powerless, then if you act, I promise you will feel better. AI is just an extension of this long hope that war could be rationalized, and the U.S. military in particular, without these sacred traditions of military combat that Afghanis have and Vietnamese have and Apaches have, and some countries, Germans, have made this into a culture that it's sustaining. The U.S. instead looks to technology to win wars. And AI, they think, promises that we can win wars technologically. Of course, the U.S. empire has lost all the wars since it's made this commitment, because war is much more complicated than that, as the feminist authors I cited earlier have said. So I don't know if AI is going to make a fundamental change. As the panel earlier today showed, and yesterday, and I hope my work shows, this does not make your military better. It's an alibi for genocide, as the Israelis are doing. It's an excuse. It's a giant center of profit. This cannot be ignored, how important it is for so many rich people to have this giant part of the human experience be utilized for preparing for and actually using destruction. Every time you blow up a tank, blow up a city, this increases your GDP, right? So it's a good thing. War is good for business. And that's more what it's about. These AI systems in the current generation of generative AI, because earlier systems were based on different frameworks, is particularly flawed and has yet to prove efficacious in really almost any realm. Eventually, it will be useful in some realms, I know, medical realms, maybe in publishing, it might help some people write. But where it is now, it should never be used for anything that's life, that involves actual life, real stakes. And that's especially true militarily, as the US will find when they go into the next war, if there is a next war by the US empire, a serious war. It doesn't win wars, it's just an illusion. But that's what the military believes in. They actually call it the silver bullet theory, that eventually there was a weapon that will win the wars. And they point to radar in World War II and so on. Now, those weapon systems were important, but in the long run, it was hundreds of thousands of Russians and British and some Americans and French dying that won the war. That's how you win wars, is killing and dying. You don't win them with technology. You win them with appropriate technology, as the Vietnamese showed, as the Afghanis showed. The Vietnamese defeated the French. They defeated the Americans. When the Americans left Vietnam, China invaded, because China thinks Vietnam is South China, and the Vietnamese defeated China. They defeated three of the most powerful countries in the world. Why? Because they're a culture that defines themselves by not being conquered, as the Afghanis do. It's not the technology you have. It's what's in here that will win the wars, unless genocide is allowed. Once genocide is allowed, as the colonial powers showed, then that changes everything. Let us hope that we won't allow genocides anymore. Never again.
Sorry, we have one more last question, but we ran out of time. I don't know if we can continue. You can, very briefly. You can, like, I don't want to, not giving you the floor. But very briefly, thank you.
Okay, this posit that AI is used as a veneer for hiding crimes against humanity behind, let's say, algorithmic opacity has been tested in other, let's say, conflict frames or only in Gaza, so that to support that this is more than a narrative and a valid posit.
Well, behind the idea of AI is that you can rationalize war. In the U.S. military, information is considered and that means in the NATO military, and all of your militaries, if you're all European, maybe you all aren't. But so information is a main force multiplier, not force of fire, which is putting a lot of metal on targets, but information. So they have free fire zones, they have kill zones. And these were used in Vietnam. Once you declared something a free fire zone, you can kill everyone in it. And that's the same kind of thinking. You define it in a certain way, and as the Israelis have defined Gaza as an open zone for killing, and then you are allowed to kill everyone, and they claim it's rational. So in that sense, we've seen this before. And it continues. It's an extension of this kind of thinking, this attempt to make something that is fundamentally irrational and horrific. Most men even cannot stay in combat super long. Only 10% of men are capable of fighting more than, in serious combat, more than a few thousand hours. Only psychopaths can kill other humans with impunity. And so you come up with technological ways to distance yourself, because people can kill at a distance much better. We see this with drones and so on. But in the long run, of course, you still have to kill other human beings. And drone pilots, it turns out, get post-traumatic stress at the same rate, because they see the people they are killing. Sometimes they watch them for days, and then they kill them. And it turns out this is psychologically extremely difficult. So they're trying to use technology to make killing easier. Even though they're having trouble with that, that's their goal. Maybe if the robots do it. But the robots would be so stupid, they won't be that good at doing it, I think. I don't know. I've been wrong about so many things. I hope I'm not wrong about that.
Thank you. I don't know if we have time. We have, okay. But very briefly again.
So it's
Because
very
we ran
brief
out of
question, just out of curiosity, and maybe it's a bit of speculation, but given certain developments in the world and all the genocide going on and changing the societal perspective and societal vision of public values, what is your prediction for the future, just from your perspective? How do you see it? Do you see it in like colorfully, or it's going to be black and white, or it's going to be gray? Just out of curiosity and.
Well, even though I'm an anarchist, I really like Antonio Gramsci. And he said you must have pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. I'm optimistic by nature. And so I think there's a good chance humanity will not destroy itself. But when I look at it logically, and when I see what the tech lords are trying to do, it's going to be very close. Of course, if humanity mobilizes, in my lifetime, I've seen feminism, the second wave of feminism, and a third wave rise up and change the world. When I was young, a woman in America could not get a credit card without her husband's permission. I saw racism, legal racism, overthrown. The current administration in the United States is fighting a culture war because they lost the last culture war. Now, that doesn't mean they might not win this one, but really most Americans even do not agree with most of the policies of MAGA, of Trump. And most people are good people. The trouble is most people just don't want to deal with all this politics. They don't want to think about it, and I don't want to think about it either. But we have to. We don't have a choice. Unless we become active, we are doomed. But if we become active, we can have a world that is sustainable and just. We really can, I believe this. I've traveled so much. I meet all the people at this conference, even the lawyers, even the tech people here trying to make money. Most of them are very good people, right? when I've hitchhiked 100,000 miles. Thousands of people picked me up. This has to make you believe in human nature. But we have to make sacrifices. I wish I did not have to do politics. I hate it. I wish I didn't have to go to jail. I don't enjoy that at all either, or get beaten up by the police, or think about this horrible stuff that my country is doing and that Israel is doing and so on. But that's the price of being human. And we have to pay that price. If we pay the price, we can save the world. I truly believe it.
Thank you. Many thanks to Chris, many thanks to Taizir, many thanks to you, and of course many thanks to the organizers, to Dasha, and to the technicians who helped us to moderate these sessions through these 3 days. Thank you so much for your great work. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope to see you next year at CPDP 2026. Let's be hopeful.
And thanks